Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to see all of you, and thanks to coming out on this beautiful Clemson day. My name is Brad Thompson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Snow Institute for the Study of Capitalism. And I would like to welcome all of you to our John W. Pope Lecture Series. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Pope Foundation for its longtime support. And now a word about the Snow Institute for the Study of Capitalism. The Snow Institute is America's premier university center dedicated to exploring the moral foundations of a free society. As many of you know, the Snow Institute is also the home of the Lyceum program, which is now recognized as one of America's most prestigious academic programs. The Lyceum program uses a great books approach to studying the history of liberty, capitalism, the American founding, and the principles of moral character. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our panel. Graham Neff is Clemson University's Director of Athletics. Mr. Neff received his undergraduate degree from Georgia Tech. Ben Milstead, a graduate of Southern Wesleyan University, is Director of Operations for the Upstate's best all sports, all the time radio station, 105.5 The Roar. He is also co-host of The Roar's afternoon show, Out of Bounds, which he does with our last panelist, William Qualkinbush. Mr. Qualkinbush graduated from Clemson in 2010 with a bachelor's degree. And he has been an on-air host of The Roar since 2011, and he also appears on the ACC network. Our topic today is, will capitalism save college sports? Mr. Neff will begin our discussion with an overview of the state of college athletics, past, present, and future. And then our two radio hosts will engage with Mr. Neff in a conversation about the new world of college athletics and where we go from here. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a rousing Clemson welcome for our panel.
Thank you, Brad. Good afternoon. Great to see everybody. As Brad alluded to the weather, admittedly, this is my first time in the renovated auditorium here in Tillman. This is gorgeous. It really is. Listen, I'm really excited for this time and just the discussion, as Brad said. Appreciative for you to be here. My opening remarks, just to frame the past, present, and future. There's a lot there that I'm going to try to condense to 10 minutes or so to lead into just our dialogue and then ultimately Q&A. I will say, though, before I get into some of the academic remarks here, just personally, this is a really special opportunity for me. In my role, I engage and speak to audiences in various forms and fashions and constituents. A lot of it's just about Clemson athletics and sports and ball and our mission and what we do. Certainly this topic and this environment and you all being here is a different audience than what maybe my typical remarks would be. And personally for me, this hits at the quintessential intersection of my why. You know, you talk about a lot of the why. Why do you do what you do, your passion and purpose. And so for me, my vocation, my line of work, right, is athletics administration. And I'm the AD guy. But why I got into it is really twofold. One, love sports, love ball, grew up playing it, love the business of sports and what that looks like in our country, in our society. But also I love higher education. And my mom was a lifelong teacher, K-12. She and my father were actually first-generation collegiate or graduates in our family. The American higher education system is the envy of the world. And there's a lot going on in higher education in our country and our world right now. But for me, the why, to be able to work in sports and in the business of sports on a college campus is my why. And so forums like this, to be able to flex that intersection here from a academic perspective, so to speak, along with just talking ball, to me is really, really unique and special. I've been at Clemson now, I'm in my 13th year. My fourth year in this role. And early on in my time at Clemson, for the first 5 or 6 years, I actually co-taught a class in the College of Business, just to kind of flex that environment of being in a classroom and curriculum and teaching a little bit and engaging from a student body standpoint. So I love this forum, this environment, to have that intersection and this discussion ultimately, Brad, to have this discussion around that why for me. So apologize for the personal passion pitch to it, but this means a lot, and I'm really excited about the environment, and Brad, incredibly appreciative for the relationship that you and I have built, let alone for you having me as part of this esteemed lecture series. That being said, the past, present, and future. The past, there's a couple, I'm going to read a little bit of my notes on it, because the past for college athletics goes back over a century. Certainly predates a lot of my personal experience, but it's really important to frame, I think, what some of the discussion here is going to be. Certainly college athletics' roots in education in our community. College athletics began in the late 1800s, 2 centuries ago, as student organizations competed rowing, football, track as extensions of campus life. We've seen the pictures of Riggs Field down here and all the different events that hosted at Clemson from over a century ago. And so that's some of the roots, at least at Clemson, but what college athletics is. Faculty and administrators gradually assumed control to ensure safety, fairness, and academic alignment. Right? This is in the 1800s. That rings true and consistent still today, quite frankly. In 1905, 120 years ago, 1905, the NCAA was formed, and it was a reform effort. Not a commercial one, so it was a reform, it was a management out of concern for health and governance. That was 120 years ago for the NCAA. Modern era, mid-20th century, introduction of athletic scholarships, opportunities for students of all backgrounds, gender, ethnic background, of course, integration, Title IX, 1972. We celebrated 3 years ago, we celebrated 50 years of Title IX in our country and the impact and the effect that that's had for opportunities in college sports in our country, let alone at Clemson. And we lean in hard to our women's sports here. I've started 3 new women's sports at Clemson in the last 5 years. Lacrosse, gymnastics, softball have already won a bunch of championships and a lot of awesome games and a lot of awesome opportunities for our women student athletes here at Clemson. Media entered the picture. This is the early 1980s. 1984 act of Board of Regents case, which really allowed schools to contain their media rights and go to market in a different commercial way. That was 40 years ago. And now you fast forward to present day, and just the complexity and the focus of media and the commercialization and professionalization of college sports, a lot of that commenced, or that harkened back to 40 years ago. So the past, while it's centuries old, has still so many red threads to present day and future day. Present day, it's a complex enterprise. The amount of constituents that we engage with, regulatory and just audiences, is significant. Multiple governing and influencing bodies. The NCAA, we've just talked about. Now there's another offshoot of the NCAA called the College Sports Commission. What a phrase, what a nomenclature for an entity that has governance and management control. Conferences and commissioners. ACC for us, has been a moving target for years, quite frankly, certainly. Federal government, never been more involvement probably from a federal government standpoint than now. Certainly state governments. We are a state agency, public land grant university of the state of South Carolina. And so the connectivity, the support, the influence within that group is significant. University administrators, boards. We have some members of our board of trustees here today. And so that ultimate governance and support from our board of trustees at Clemson, our president, there's not a better president in the country than Jim Clements for what he does to lead this university, let alone his flex and support of college athletics, of Clemson athletics. Student athletes and coaches. We have 21 sports at Clemson, including the 3 that we started in the last 6 years. 21 sports, that's 17 head coaches, that's 550 student athletes. And the complexity, the diversity of the sport and the commercialization of each sport, let alone the competitive strategies and opportunities per sport. And then certainly donors, sponsors, media networks. So much of what we talk about now from a leadership standpoint for athletic directors is around media and commercialization. Now, so important now, even compared to certainly 40 years ago. The donor constituents, we work in, I like to think of our industry or my job, it's not college athletics, it's not just football, it's sports and entertainment. And we have 81,000 in the Valley 7 Saturdays a year. And we have 57,000 season ticket holders or season tickets we sell. We have 22,000 plus Upstate members. When you include collegiate club, many students are in here, members of the student collegiate club and Tiger Cubs. We have over 30,000 just donors that support philanthropically to Upstate. It's one of the biggest, best athletic fundraising organizations in the country. It's a huge constituent group, incredibly important from an economic standpoint, let alone just a connectivity and interest. Let's talk economics for just a bit. Our budget in the 13 years since I've been here, as I referenced, and I initially came to Clemson in 2013 as our chief financial officer, as the finance guy. And our budget was $66 million, FY13, I can still picture it in my head, $66 million. To frame that magnitude, it was about 25th to 30th in the country, if there were to be a ranking of how big your budget is, how big your bank account. Now, fast forward 13 years, it's a long time, a lot of change. Our budget this fiscal year is $215 million. 3.5x, right? Over 3x increase. Now, the industry has significantly changed, but at Clemson, how we've leveraged our revenue growth strategy, certainly the success of football, that's allowed us to move up the ranking order, so to speak, from 25th to 30th to 18th this year. Again, there's no top 25 for how big your budget is, but it's indicative of resources and investment and ultimately has relation to success and competitive opportunities, of course. So just in a decade, 3.5x revenue increase and expense increase. It is an interesting nonprofit environment. We are an auxiliary unit of the university. In a very simple sense, and we talk about this with our coaches and staff, we're an auxiliary unit of the university, just like parking and housing and dining, if you look at the budget and account code, so to speak, and how we balance budgets and revenues. Now, that's sheepish to say, because certainly how we index on exposure and awareness and value, so to speak, to the university in order of magnitude, it's big business. It matters. We self-generate nearly all of our $215 million budget. 3 primary buckets are ticket sales. For us, it's close to $40 million of ticket sales. Over 85% of that ticket sales certainly comes from football. Second big bucket is our conference distribution, which effectively is driven by television, ESPN, et cetera. That's over $65 million. And then also, and most importantly, is Upstate and our donors and supporters, collegiate club on up. That's over $60 million on a cash basis for this year. So just between those 3 buckets of ticket sales, of Upstate contributions, and conference distribution, call it media contribution, that's over 80% of our budget, just in those 3 buckets. And now the other is where there's a lot of strategy and innovation as well, with sales and sponsorships and concessions. We get the concessions feedback and take it seriously, and there's a lot of room to improve there. But how we generate and continue to leverage revenue opportunities to grow the totality of our revenue and resources is significant. But we do know now, starting this year, as we transition into even a new era of college athletics, call it the House era. House case is a settlement that was related to NIL and commercial opportunities for student athletes. So for the first time ever, this July 1st, we're 3 months in, we're a quarter in, we can directly compensate, we the university, we the athletic department, directly compensate dollars to our student athletes. It's a capped system. It's at $20.5 million this year is the capped amount. That has the discretion within each university to allocate amongst your per team or amongst your teams and amongst your student athletes. That's direct from the university. Huge change. Never been a change as significant as that since 1905, since the NCAA was created. And we're still building the enforcement and the governance mechanism of how that's implemented. The quintessential building and painting the airplane while we're flying it. And so it's a really complex economic model balanced with now the levers and the strategies around how you change your business model and then invest to perform competitively. There's a scoreboard in our industry. We got to win, right? And that's one of the beauties of athletics, of sports, is there's more than hardly anything a very objective measure to success, at least on the fields. There's a scoreboard, right? And at Clemson, we want to win at the highest level in all 21 of our sports. But it's a bit of a zero-sum game of your allocation of revenue share dollars in your $20.5 million, let alone while we try to raise revenues and continue to invest and, quite frankly, keep the main thing here at Clemson, because it is still student collegiate athletics all 550 of our athletes are students first, kind of by definition. And so that balance, that economic model change and the competitive pressures of wanting to win now in all of it has never been as significant or as in arrears, so to speak, as it is now. Lastly, before I move on to the future, the connectivity and the index of athletics for our university mission. Again, back to this, we're an auxiliary unit of the university. But at Clemson, athletics really matters. And you all know that, you feel that, and we talk about a lot what our inclusion is and what our role is, the athletics department, as part of Clemson Elevate. University strategic plan, adopted by our board of trustees, implemented by President Clements and staff. And the number one pillar is the number one student experience, right? Number two is research focus, research ascension. Number three is community support, land grant mission, health and wellness. But number one student experience, the role that athletics plays in that here at Clemson, I don't think there's a higher ratio of that importance and involvement of athletics within a student experience than there is at Clemson. And I talk about that with our coaches and our student athletes of the obligation that we have to uphold that end of the bargain and how that helps drive application rates and admissions rates and retention rates, right? Metrics that are incredibly significant. What athletics does, sure, on 7 Saturdays in the Valley, but throughout the year, throughout all 21 of our sports, and that part of the number one student experience is significant. It's something that we do not take lightly. Okay, to wrap up, a few last comments on the future. It's hard to encapsulate that. Look forward to how we talk about that, Will and Ben. But the reality is around the corner, there's going to be continued discussion around employment status, collective bargaining, revenue sharing, as I said, just commenced 3 months ago. Super leagues, premier leagues, right? So all that discussion and headlines and Twitter and social, like that's very, very real and active right now. And it's hard to predict what the next decade holds, let alone what next year holds. There's never been as much change in college athletics over the last 3 to 5 years as there has been the last 3 to 5 years. But I'd anticipate and expect, and we are preparing and front-footed for that much change or more in the next 3 to 5, let alone what the next decade looks like. Ongoing challenges relating to the balance of how do we compete and win the right way in all 21 of our sports, with the reality is, at least at Clemson, 86% of our revenues are generated from one sport, football. Football drives, and the margin that football creates effectively pays for all 20 other sports, or at least other 19 sports. Men's basketball here at Clemson drives some net proceeds. But the other 19 sports are loss leaders in some regard from a financial standpoint. And so that balance and that pressure to continue to invest and drive your most ROI driving business unit, football, in order to support and fuel resources for your other business units. You know, some would say college athletics is a big business. I said that earlier. The reality is, that type of business model is probably one of one. And when we talk about that from a capitalistic standpoint, that's a really unique balance and thread that we have to balance these days, let alone what the pressures and the continued revenue growth and commercialization forces are gonna dictate there. Listen, from a future success standpoint, and something that really passionate about here at Clemson, and I feel like it's been our secret sauce, and we've led on how you talk on alignment within the constituency groups that I talked on earlier, and specifically on your campus. And so our board of trustees, our president, our athletics leadership and coaches, that alignment, that mission-driven focus, that communication and relationship, that's going to continue to index on making hard decisions that have even more financial ramifications than we've seen. And so that type of balance and focus to keep the main thing, while also to do it in a changing dynamic environment that it's hard to see around the corner, that just comes down to people, and that type of alignment is incredibly important while we're adapting our business model. So I really look forward to the conversation, Brad. I hope this framed some past, present, and future. Couldn't be more excited to be here, couldn't be more excited to engage in this dialogue and to help lead for Clemson, and keeping the main thing, but keeping Clemson. And we're going to continue to do that. We've had success. There's challenges every day, but I'm eager for what the next chapter looks like ahead for Clemson. So look forward to the conversation, Brad, and hope that frame for Ben and Will as we get into dialogue.
Great. Two things before we begin. First, I really do want to put in a plug for 105.5 The Roar, which I listen to every single day without fail. It's a wonderful radio station, and if you love Clemson athletics, you should be listening to 105.5. The second thing I want to mention is after we have our conversation, we will try to reserve about 30 minutes for Q&A with the audience. And we have speakers down here at the very front. Please feel free to line up and ask a question. My only request, please, is that you not make a speech, but rather you just simply ask a question, which typically begins with what, where, why, and how. So with that, actually maybe I'll start, and then we'll bring Ben and, as he is affectionately known by his listeners, Quack, on the radio station. So Graham, my question to you is, what does it mean today to keep Clemson Clemson, right? Because that suggests that there is a Clemson way, and that the Clemson way may be different from, I don't know, the Georgia way. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Please, yes. And I was checking my notes. Not that we've prompted these questions at all. We've prepped a little bit, but this is just truly a real active dialogue. I think I covered most of my remarks, or my notes in my opening remarks. What does keeping Clemson Clemson mean? I think back to our values of our university, and it's also just a feel, something in these hills, right? It's in our alma mater, and so I think that there's a balance to want to win at the highest level, and generate revenues and invest at the highest level and compete on the field and for recruiting, et cetera. But also, there's the history of like the values that are hold true from an academic standpoint. And it's something we talk about IPTAY and the support of IPTAY for all of our scholarships and all of our academic staff members and tutors. And without having the stats right off the top of my head, we Clemson are literally the best in the country public Power 5 school of our academic success metrics. It means GSR, which is graduation success rate. That's APR, academic performance rate. There's these metrics that are tracked. We're the best in the country and have been for the recent history and decades. A lot of that goes back to innovation with Vickery Hall. Was one of the first, this was in the 80s, one of the first athletic academic units and facilities in the country. And so that really matters here. That's not to suggest that it doesn't at Georgia, your example, but that over-indexes on the importance of that type of coaches that we attract and the culture that they instill in our student athletes, and then what that looks like for our in-game and fan experience. Again, 7 Saturdays out there. I can't tell you how many pieces of feedback I get from visiting teams. SMU just came, our most recent home game. They beat us on the scoreboard, but that was our first time at Clemson. The amount of feedback I got from their leadership, their coach, who I know a little bit, about, gosh, that was a great, Clemson, no place is more welcoming. It was a great, your hospitality, your game day is special. So it's a little subjective and maybe, a little fluffy, Brad, to answer your question of kind of like you know it and you feel it. But it's ultimately rooted in the values and what's important from a leadership standpoint for the university and then how we express that athletically.
Yeah, very good. Ben, Quack?
First of all, let me say thank you all for being here. My parents are here. My old boss is here, Tim Beret. I had great memories here, and I appreciate you guys engaging in this forum and listening to our show from noon to 3 every day on 105.5 The Roar. As a result, I know you will. Graham, I took a lot of notes while you were talking, so I'm getting to them. One of the things that I think is interesting about Keep Clemson Clemson, and we run into this, Ben and I actually talked about this on our show today, that I think for a lot of people, Keep Clemson Clemson means that we do more with none. What it really means is we do more with less. That's the way I see it. And so I think when 5 years ago, when NIL became a thing, when the transfer portal comes around, I think a lot of people are going, well, we don't need that, newfangled money because we don't need anything. And I think that, and you could speak to this, Graham, I think that was an uphill battle, like maybe rhetorically with donors and rhetorically with fans, about understanding that, the relational stuff is nice. And in fact, the relational stuff is what makes us special. But if we don't back it with something, we're not going to have much. We're not going to win. And one of the things that I think is so interesting as you look around athletics, and I'm fortunate that I get to call a lot of games and I get to commune with a lot of coaches. Everybody's got a little bit of a different philosophy on NIL, on transfer portal usage, roster construction, recruiting, that sort of stuff. Bottom line is, I think the ones that do the best are the ones that understand we don't have the most resources, but we do have the best people. So how can we sort of maximize, meet in the middle of that bell curve? And I wonder, have you had a hard time in this era of trying to convince people that it's not more with none, but it is potentially more with less?
I love the frame of that, the fight above our weight class mentality to that for sure. Listen, Qualk, to your point, the last 5 years, I mean, it was June 29th of 2021 that the NCAA changed and allowed for NIL to take effect 2 days later, July 1st of 2021. You know, so we're 4.5 years into that era, so to speak. Now, I'd argue that era has changed a little bit this past July, 3 months ago, given the revenue sharing effect. Point being, these past 4 years, Qualk, have been really hard to not only navigate and interface and communicate with our constituents. Felt like the rules changed every 2 months. So we're saying one thing to our coaches and to our donors and to our student athletes. We can't even talk about NIL or a collective. And then fast forward 2 months later, well, we can talk about our collective, and then fast forward 2 semesters later, and we're actively fundraising towards our collective. And then fast forward another year, and we're actively contributing to our collective, right? And so like that mixed messaging, just given the dynastic activity of rules and what the regulations were, was incredibly confusing. That admittedly, it was really hard to strategically communicate in that way, clearly communicate. Your question is more specific, hey, for Clemson to activate upon that. Absolutely. And I found myself tried to acknowledge that, hey, there's a lot of this changing environment, NIL to student athletes, direct revenue share, that, have different certain feels about it. Don't like it, don't want to contribute to it, want nothing to do with it. And so, don't condone any of that other than to say, well, here, this is the rules of the road. Qualk, to your point, Clemson people, we want to win, expect to win at the highest level. And so here's the rules of the road, and it's my job to help navigate and lean on that as best we can. So incredibly difficult era, so to speak. It happened to coincide with me changing into this role, which was, I thank Jim for that from time to time, Jim Clements. And so it's been really difficult while we jump into, again, call it this July revenue sharing era. That's very different, but it's furthering the direct payment and the changing business model. But I hope the anticipation is that there's some more consistencies of rules and regulations such that we can communicate and set our strategies a little bit more directly and lean into it versus having to be so nimble and changed over the prior 4 years.
First, I'm honored to be part of this. Qualk and I don't normally get to see our audience on radio, so this is a little intimidating, a little out of our comfort zone, but really happy to be here. You mentioned your role, Graham. We've talked to coaches who have talked about the fundraising element of their jobs now, and you moved from chief financial officer now to AD, yet it feels like maybe you're more involved now than ever before in the fundraising and revenue generation than even you were prior to having the role. Accurate?
Certainly accurate. Again, the lean on revenue generation to fuel, again, prior era of NIL, but then now, if we jump back to some of my financials, I'll flex the CFO background, right? This year, this fiscal, $250 million budget. And again, starting July 1st, the ability to directly revenue share $20 million, which was permissive. It was not required. No school, Clemson didn't have to do a penny of that, so to speak. Certainly competitively, we're going to lean into that, the full amount. But from an order of magnitude, that's 10% of your budget, just from one fiscal to the next of an increase. That is incredibly competitive. Furthermore, one of the things of the House case that is much more traditional from a college athletic standpoint is deregulation of scholarships. Scholarships were regulated, were limited from an NCAA standpoint. Best example, and that's really familiar here at Clemson, is baseball. 35 students, guys on baseball team, they had 11.7, funny number, 11.7 scholarships to distribute. So you had some guys that were just pure walk-ons, some that had 25% scholarship. Your star players were 75 or 100% scholarship. Really regulated, but every sport regulated. Football's 85, men's basketball's 13, women's tennis is 6, I can keep going. And so, but now, starting this July 1st, fully deregulated. Everybody that's on your roster can have full scholarships. It's a great thing for opportunity, great thing for men's sports and women's sports, great opportunity for us via IPTE, which has been so tried and true on supporting, investing in scholarships, to really lean into that. And so now this year, we've added 153 scholarships this year. IPTE has. About $5.5 million on top of the $20 million of revenue share. And so that amount of just economic expense, to tie back to your question, Ben, leans into the revenue generation. And so absolutely, from a fundraising standpoint, the commercial arms and strategies of revenue generation. Last fall, we launched what we call Clemson Ventures, okay? And it's an affiliated entity of the university. Think IPTE. IPTE was founded in 1934. It's 91 years old. Incredibly mature, strong, active board and leadership and staff. And it's the revenue-generating arm of Clemson Athletics from a philanthropic standpoint, right? Donations. Clemson Ventures sits on the other side, so to speak, that it's our revenue-generating arm, has a board, it's structured very similarly, but it's commercial revenue generation, sales, sponsorship, licensing, media, Clemson Plus. And so that structure is really innovative. And admittedly, I get calls weekly from other colleagues, tell me about Clemson Ventures. How'd you structure that up? How does that work with your board and your president and your staff and IPTE? So that's a perspective of innovation. The last thing I'll say, and this might preempt another question, but something I'm also really passionate about, is how we continue to adapt and evolve, how we interface, and how we ultimately generate revenue. Let me give you the stat. Clemson University, we have about 190,000 living alums. Continues to increase. President Clements, in his 12th year here now, in his 12 commencements, I know you get fall, spring, winter, has graduated, I think it's over 60,000 students, maybe 70,000 students. Implication being, that's about a third, I think a little bit more than a third of our living alums have graduated in the last 12 years, meaning their demographic is generally, in their 30 or younger, in their 20s, low 30s. And that demographic or that generation, I'm not too far removed from that, right? They consume sports and entertainment and media and revenue in a very different way than a lot of our other living alums and fans, right? And so how do we continue to build and engage that generation for now? Because it makes up 30% plus of our of our living alums. But also, you fast forward a decade, and man, that bell curve, Qualk, that you referenced, that's going to be a significant changing interface and demographic from an interface standpoint, let alone a revenue generation standpoint.
You mentioned the revenue bucket of IPTE, but now we have NIL that is very important as well. What's your concern level between where donors spend their money with IPTE and NIL? How do you balance those two?
Ooh, that is a active conversation, an active mindset. Listen, at the end of the day, we need to continue to fuel our traditional revenue levers that I talked about. Again, our three big levers, over 80% of our revenues come from ticket sales, right? And the discretionary income and the economics of that and the supply-demand quotient, the elasticity of that. Hopefully these are some good buzzwords, Brad. Yeah. Something we think about a lot, truly, that's genuine. Right, it's sports and entertainment, so we can't just flex and increase ticket prices because we need more money. Like there's significant strategy and analytics to that. Media, television, our ACC distribution, and then IPTE, to your point. So ultimately, we need to continue to fuel those to grow our budgets for the direct expenses that we can have to our student athletes in our department. Wow, I'll try to keep this simple from a structural standpoint. What we can do, what's afforded within the House case settlement, is that we, universities, can facilitate NIL deals that are able to go to student athletes above and beyond the cap, okay, the direct revenue share. Direct revenue share comes from us. NIL is still allowed, but it has to be commercially or business focused. Has to have there's a fair market value assessment. There's a clearinghouse and a valid business purpose process. And so we can facilitate that. So Clemson Ventures for us interfaces from a commercial and a business environment. And competitively, it's important for us to drive dollars to our student athletes that way. But at the end of the day, and this is Ben's point, a lot of that's the same universe of folks, of business owners, of sponsors that are giving money to sponsor Clemson athletics. But we're also saying, hey, we'd love for you to sponsor our men's and women's basketball players, because that's really a competitive edge. And so we don't have an equation or a quotient to it, Ben, but that balance, that healthy tension of how we continue to drive our revenues in order to support and run our business and operations while leaning into the competitive edge of growing dollars that are able to go directly to our student athletes from us or from the business community, meaning NIL, that is the highest of strategy and task at hand.
Let me just jump in, because not everybody in the room knows, or many of you may not know exactly what NIL is and the portal. So could you just briefly explain NIL and the portal, and then I'd like the three of you to engage in a conversation about how the portal and NIL has changed college athletics.
It's really interesting, and Qualk was pressing on kind of the interface in NIL. So again, and this is helpful audience for me to continue to communicate and refresh on rules of the road now. The last 4 years, summer of 21 to summer of 25, NIL was not allowed to come. There was no direct payments from the universities to the student athletes. Not allowed. NIL was allowed. The form that took was universities asking our donors, our supporters, to give money over here, which was a collective. We had a couple collectives that formed for the university. Collective is a funny word, but it's basically a third party that would take donor dollars and then direct it to players. But again, we were able to help encourage and fundraise to that over here. And that was incredibly important because that was the rules of the road for 4 years. July 1st, that's not allowed. Any dollars that go to student athletes not from the university have to be business, commercially driven, of a fair market value through a clearinghouse test, not just donor dollars. And so now we're reframing our message that, hey, those donor dollars that we've been asking you to consider giving over here for the last 4 years, actually kind of give them back to us. But we got to lean into NIL from a business and a commercial lens here above and beyond it. So that dynamic and that kind of fundamental change of what NIL is was significant just over these past 3 months. Transfer portal. It's a roster management tool in a very simple sense, where the fuel, the spin wheel of that is that now it's effectively a free market for our student athletes. There's no limitations for them to restrict transfers. There's windows, but the ability to transfer every year, that change happened in the summer of 21 at the well, summer of 21 as well, all concurrent. NIL can start, is allowed, student athletes can get those dollars kind of, again, this way, and annual transfers were allowed. So now, the way for student athletes to maximize their value, some leverage, if they're performing, whatever the sport may be, would be to hop in the portal, right, Brad? Mm-hmm. And now schools that are recruiting them have an ability to kind of over here send dollars to them. And so while they're two inherently different things, certainly roster management, meaning the transfer portal, and NIL, meaning how do you flow dollars, but the fact that those were both, call it deregulated and then leveraged here in college athletics, given the passion and energy and expectations to win, has just become a snowball running down the hill, perhaps is an analogy.
Yeah, so every single day when I'm driving into work and coming home from work, when I listen to 105.5 The Roar, that's all I hear people talking about is the portal and NIL. So the question for the three of you is, are they good things for college athletics?
It's a good question. I think the combination, to me, is the problem. I think separately they're very good, and in fact, if there were more of an actual market, which I'll get to that in a second, if there were more of an actual market as opposed to just like slinging mud at the wall, I think they would be good. I think freedom of movement is very good. By the way, for the athletes in the audience, please don't go. We'd love for you to stay. You want to take advantage of the portal, that's fine, but I don't want that. The NIL piece, totally fine. In fact, I remember advocating NIL and getting crushed. And it was fascinating because some of the people, we have a text line on our station where we can see past texts from people. And these are people who, like, they would text us, and they are fiscal conservatives, okay? They would call themselves fiscal conservatives and probably political conservatives who are like, no money. And so I'm thinking, now wait a minute. These are people who, like, during the political unrest of 2020, they would be espousing very conservative views, but when it comes to free markets, they're not. Why is that? Well, I'm gonna go ahead and do it, guys. I think I'm the only sports radio host that has Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations on his bookshelf. That's not something that's routinely a thing. But Adam Smith talks about markets with parameters. And one of the parameters is that your self-interest guides the market. So your self-interest is the thing that sort of makes sure that there are some sort of parameters. If I misstep, you just yell over me. I'm good, because y'all know Adam Smith better than I do. But my thing is, this is not a market. Because when you're going back and forth in the transfer portal, let's say, or in high school recruiting, I'm a coach, I offer $250,000 for a player as a part of my $20.5 million rev share. Somebody else can offer $400,000, and I don't know that. There's no way to be sure of the dollar amounts that anybody says. It's all what I would call demand side. It's all demand. The player is the only one that actually knows the values. And so I would say to the question, actually, I'm going to take some liberties here. Can I poll the audience? Is that okay? Sure. I'm going to poll the audience. How many, the question that we're talking about here is, will capitalism save college sports? How many people have come in here today and you think capitalism will save college sports? Fantastic, man. How many people think that capitalism is going to be the death of college sports? You guys are capitalist scholars, and you're saying that. My argument would be that we have never tried capitalism in college athletics. We have a weird system where in sports we have this inherent sense of fairness. We want things to be fair. In the NFL, they make money hand over fist. I mean, it's a $1 trillion business, basically, when all told, with advertising and everything else. It's $1 trillion, multi-billions of dollars, but they have salary caps. They have limits to which they can spend. Right now, we don't even know if I'm a player. I can lie to the person across the table from me and say, the last guy I met with offered me $250,000, and there's nobody to say otherwise. I would argue that actual capitalism would require almost like unionization, which is not particularly capitalist, so that student athletes can negotiate these things, these terms, and say, you know what? We are going to regulate the marketplace just so that we know where the money is allocated, who's trying to allocate the money, and what that actually goes to. So that's my whole market spiel right there.
So let me ask both of you this. Athletics has moved from a little more of a socialistic standpoint to now a capitalistic standpoint, where we used to strive for everything to be even. And I think we're struggling to know where those guardrails need to be. You bring up a good point, Qualk, that we don't know the market value. Do we need to know? Do these things need to be public? Because you and I get, Qualk and I get asked that a lot about this player allegedly makes this much, or, you know, does that information need to be public?
Graham?
Yes, Graham.
I'd certainly would agree that would help with the smoothing of the operations in the market. Your examples, Qualk, of the athlete or the agent often is the beholder of the information, and the leverage or the hearsay, that very real. The socialistic nature of equity, and equity meaning everybody, you're confined to be able to compete in an equitable manner. It's interesting. I'll harken back to prior to coming to Clemson. I worked at Middle Tennessee State University. We were in the Sun Belt Conference. Now they're in Conference USA, mid-major group of 6 school now. Okay, when I left Middle Tennessee, I promise I don't just lead with all the dollars and cents per se. Our budget was $30 million. 30. I don't know how that ranked, but I came to Clemson, 66 million. Holy cow, Power 5 or the BCS conference at the time, right? And now, in 12 years, Clemson, we've 3.5x'd our revenues. I don't know the exact latest financials, but Middle Tennessee State, their budget probably went from 30 million to 40 million. 30% increase. Still over a decade, that's not bad. But right, the order of magnitude, that's just suggesting that any of the similarities that Clemson and Middle Tennessee had from last decade, man, those worlds look so different, so different, so different now. And so while there still is this notion, because there's a cap of our revenue share, and it is healthy to the athletics ecosystem, that it's not just the Power 4 conferences or Power 4 conferences and schools, that's 70 of us, but FBS football is 130, and we play Troy, whose budget's probably 40 million this year, right? They gave us a good game. And so, like, that's it. March Madness, there's 360 Division I men's basketball schools, and the best 2 days, two of the best days of the year are the Thursday and Friday of March Madness, because you get St. Peter's beating Kentucky, or whom, right? Oakland beat Kentucky a couple years ago. And so Middle Tennessee, 15 seed, beat number 2 Michigan State. And so like that notion, that's part of the fabric of college athletics and American higher education. And so the ecosystem needs the participatory and the active and the healthy have-nots, group of 6, Division I, mid-majors, right, low majors. And so again, I don't know if that's at odds, Brad, from a capitalistic nature, but like there's this balance of, yeah, the invest in the big, and the big are going to continue to succeed, and then that's where the heavies go. But the ecosystem has health for the populace as well.
One of the things I think, and you could speak to this a little bit. I remember I was supposed to be working in Tim Baray's office 15 years ago, but I remember reading a preseason college football magazine. This was around the time when folks were getting furloughed in universities, 2009, 10, somewhere around in there. And I remember reading in this magazine that at the University of Miami, there was a quote from an administrator that said, hey, the worst thing this is worst case scenario because our university is not giving money back to us this year. Like we've significantly cut the amount of university money we've cut back. And so I'm like, wait a minute. Do we do that? Like, does the university kick money back to us in athletics? So I started asking around. I'm going through Jervy like, hey, what's the deal? I'll probably talk to Robert Ricketts about it. Like, it's one of those things. And the reality is it has not until this year because of the financial stress and strain. I remember about 10 years ago, I was meeting with some student leaders who were very opposed to student ticket fees, student athletic fees. And what I said to them then is, all you're doing is you're making it harder on future generations of students if you don't take a good deal. Well, now it's actually good for Clemson that a lot of schools who have to find $20.5 million for rev share under the couch cushions have 2 new streams of income that almost every other school in America has already allocated. One is student athletic fees, which, Graham, you could speak to that and the newness of that and the peculiarity of that. The other one is alcohol sales, which you're making up probably about half of your $20.5 million just like that. So Clemson actually, I said people think that Clemson's doing more with none, but it's actually more with less. Clemson actually has been pretty well positioned to find the money under the couch cushions by generating new revenue streams that other people have already allocated, right?
Fair. Well, yeah,
okay.
Exactly. Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
I feel good about that.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Good.
So I want to ask you about another potential revenue stream. The Big Ten Conference is one that seems to be one of the haves. Not that everyone else is a have-not, but they seem to be financially.
They're the most. Their distributions to their conference members are the highest in the country, about $80 million a year or so this year.
So when I hear that they are exploring private equity as a conference, honestly, that terrifies me from an ACC standpoint, because my thought is if they need private equity, then what does the Big 12 and the ACC and others need? Generally speaking, is private equity needed? Is that a good idea, bad idea? Unknown.
A couple macro thoughts to it. My sense or my understanding of private equity is they're certainly for-profit businesses. They see opportunity, they see financial upside. which would suggest that there's room for improvement from a business standpoint. Maybe I'll say it that way. And so, of which I certainly agree, and I'm inside the elephant here of college athletics, but the complexity, a little bit of what I talked on of our structure of trying to generate revenues and be a commercial sports entertainment entity while we're operating in a bureaucratic public setting, there's inefficiencies to that. Maybe that was the word I was looking for earlier. There's inefficiencies in our business. And so private equity can see opportunity to create efficiencies, whatever that looks like on a pro forma, generate dollars. So I understand absolutely, we are well read on the private equity opportunities for Clemson, quite frankly, let alone for the industry. Furthermore, and this is where some of the Big Ten component comes into it, Ben, is, right, again, one of our 3 biggest revenue streams for Clemson for all schools like us is your conference distribution, Big Ten, your example, and ultimately that's fueled from media contracts, right, for the ACC, ESPN. The market, there's a lot of discussion right now in Congress around how your media deals as an industry are constructed. Right now they are done on a conference-by-conference basis. ACC's partners ESPN, we generate 40-something million per year. Big Ten is with Fox and NBC and CBS, and they generate, again, 80-plus million. The reality is, though, and then the SEC has their partnerships, and the Big 12 and the Sun Belt, et cetera, but they are not coterminous, meaning the ACC's ends in 2036, the Big Ten's ends in 2030, the SEC ends in 2034. So we're fragmented as a market. There's a stat here that I'm going to be sanding or rounding, but college football is the second most valued, viewed sports league in the country, only behind the NFL. Has more viewership, from a media standpoint, more viewership than the NBA and MLB, et cetera. So second highest most viewed, call it league or entity. As compared to the NBA, this is where the numbers are a little off, but the point is the order of magnitude. College football has about 1.7x of viewership of the NBA. But collectively, our media value, what we make from selling our media rights, is about 35 cents on the dollar. And a lot of that is done, or is fact, because of the fragmentation of how we go to market with our media rights. The NBA, when they go to negotiate their media rights, they go all at once. And they can segment it out, they can schedule it strategically, they balance their streaming platforms with their traditional linear cable. And so they're organized in that way. They're able to maximize and leverage their value. And so they do. College athletics is fragmented, and so there's inefficiencies there. So maybe a roundabout way, Ben, on the private equity piece, there's inefficiencies certainly in our operations and our business constraints, et cetera, and expertise and talent, quite frankly, but then also of how the structure of our industry is, at least specifically from a media rights standpoint. So there's opportunity there. If the Big Ten gets any private equity deals across the finish line, it gets very political. There's complexities to it, of course. But lastly, maybe I'll end with the question this way. It's also betting, why they're looking at it, my understanding or simple sense would be, is they're betting on the future value lift of at least the Big Ten in this case. That when they go back to market with their media rights in 2030, and then later on in the decade, that value of live sports and specifically college football is going to continue to increase. So injecting capital now from a private equity standpoint to create value now that, if you have shares or whatever, would normalize out as you have future value lift at those inflection points.
Can we talk a little Title IX for a second? One of the things that bothers me, and it makes me sad, I've got 2 sisters. My dad is a softball coach, and you can see, like, at some point, potentially, Title IX gets reframed or redefined somehow. You got 53 years, I believe, of history of just providing opportunity for female athletes. Lacrosse and gymnastics as 2 examples. These are sports that within the last 5 years that Clemson has added, funded, and are excellent. And I think they're value adds to our community. And I think a lot of students would agree, and I think a lot of community members would agree. They're selling out Little John for gymnastics. Lacrosse is recruiting great. It's unbelievable. But
softball, you didn't even talk about softball.
Yeah. Softball. God.
6 years ago, Team 6. Yeah.
Get the runner home from third, man. We're going to OKC.
60 feet away.
But here's my question, because it does bother me that in this capitalistic structure, that opportunity feels threatened, especially, with, I'll just say, a conservative Supreme Court that may view that a little bit differently. So are there fears around that? And honestly, from a capitalistic standpoint, I think you would agree, like, the NIL is sort of a eat what you kill situation anyway. It just feels like dollars might be better spent. Like, a lot of Clemson fans are probably like, just throw it all at football, men's basketball, baseball, whatever sport I like, and don't shut down the other sports. But if those sports win, I'm fine. What are you navigating in that realm?
Boy, it is. Again, those are two ends of the rubber band that tension gets pulled. Fundamentally, how Title IX works for us from an athletics department standpoint is that we have to be, everyone thinks, it's got to be 50-50, right? Well, it's more nuanced than that. And it's interesting as it relates to the student body in our university. So we have to have proportional opportunities, meaning roster spots and then scholarship investment proportional to the gender balance of your university. And right now, these stats are a little rounded, but the student body at Clemson for this year is about 53%, I think it might even be 53.5% female, 46.5% male. If we rewind back decades, holy cow, all male institution, right, to start, let alone even last decade when I came here, it was about 52-48 the other way. And so that changing balance of American higher education, there's a lot written, I've read a lot about males versus females graduating high school and propensity for college, et cetera, and earning power. Brad, you probably lecture on some of that. So there's that change within our industry of higher education. And then at Clemson, right, investment and growth of the Powers College of Business and some of the majors and maybe the lean towards the gender balance of students in that college, right, that we're talking to a lot here. Or our nursing program was started and is significant growth within the past decade at Clemson, heavily female-oriented, of course. And so at Clemson, we've seen that ratio ultimately flip, but that might continue to go in that direction. And we athletically have to be responsive to that. Ergo starting gymnastics and starting lacrosse in order to keep our proportionality within the federal guidelines of what is required by us as being a state, public, federally funded agency. So that's really fundamental. Your question, your more functional question, Qualk, is, gosh, that's how do you balance that? And as I said earlier, right, 86% of our revenues at Clemson are generated from football. And they ultimately pay for the other 19 and a half sports. And so this flywheel of investment in football, and it's like that at most schools. Our 86% is heavily indexed. We can sense that. We know that to be true. But so the urgency to succeed, to have excellent program and have excellent facilities and revenue generation, there's that flywheel of investment. You do that with football. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we only have $215 million within our budget, so that's got to come from somewhere in some regard. So you're just kind of you're chasing a little bit in order to fuel and invest to have success in football, but then also for how that helps to invest and have success in all these other sports too. But that slope is slippery and hard. There has been examples throughout the country of cutting sports or reducing funding or underfunding sports. To be sure, Qualk, and we have some history of that here at Clemson, and not too recent, not too distant. And so it is really it is very difficult. That being said, I am proud at Clemson of the success we've had, the expansion of those opportunities, and quite frankly, from a community and a supporter standpoint, just the energy and the excitement that we want to win in everything, and football really, really matters. But man, the passion and the expectations, call it, of all of our sports, but particularly our women's sports, I view that to over-index here in an incredibly positive way and supported by our leadership and ultimately our institution.
So I'd like to jump in and defend, if I could, your callers, your conservative callers who complain about NIL and the portal. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me it's not that they're complaining about the economics so much of the portal. I think your callers, sociologically, the first thing to say is not so much that they're conservatives, they're boomers.
That right? Is fair.
And so as a boomer, I will speak in defense of boomers. And I think what it is that they are complaining about is that they want to conserve the old traditions, the old cultural folkways of college athletics. And at the heart of that is one word: loyalty. Right? So now we live in a world with the portal. Players are at Clemson for a year or two, or at any other university, and they're gone. Right? And so, and now, players have opportunities. We know there are examples of players at different universities, who, because of NIL, are driving Lamborghinis, and then they hit the portal and they go to another university and they get another Lamborghini. Right? And so the question that a lot of, I think, your audience, and Ben, your audience, that they want to know is where is the loyalty? Which then goes to the question of what it means in the 21st century, post-2020, to be a student athlete. So now the question is, what is the student in student athlete? Right? And if players are making $1 million a year, there's not really a great incentive to be a student. And so my question is this: on behalf of all the boomers in the audience, I want to know this: has that ship sailed? Would you say we can't get there from here anymore? The old days are gone. And we're living in an entirely different world, and get used to it.
I would say yes.
Yes,
Because, yes, the old days are gone.
Yeah.
And the reason is because the market is unknown. We don't actually know how to put the genie back in the bottle because we don't actually know what the genie looks like or the bottle. There's no way to know how to regulate it. There's no parameters. And so I don't know how it's trying to regulate a black market, basically. That's what I would say. Right. That is not I'm a very hopeful person. I'm very optimistic, trust me. But that is not a very hopeful message to people who are trying to conserve. I'm curious, what's your thought on that, Ben?
And I would say no to that from the standpoint of you go to college to get an education so that your income is greater down the road. The fact that someone can make $1 million in college, I have no issue with that at all. I would say that's your ultimate goal. If it's my son, he's playing football whether he likes it or not, if he can make $1 million. But to what you're saying, the phrase that we hear maybe more often than any other is the wild, wild west. I don't know that it's so much that we have an issue with making that amount of money. It's just we don't know what the guardrails are or the rules associated with making that kind of money. So I'll ask you this, Graham. Are we at a point where the government, we actually need more government in this area, which I'm not entirely comfortable with, but that feels like the desperate place that we are right now, that might be what it takes?
Wild Wild West is probably driven by just the litigious environment that we're in, specifically in this college athletics, right? I think there's been upwards of 40, close to 40 lawsuits within the last 2 years regarding eligibility. Just eligibility. 4 years. And right now the rules are generally you got 5 to play 4, right? You can redshirt as a freshman, and then there's waivers because you get hurt, medical redshirts. But now, given that there is financial value to any of those years, one of those years in college athletics, there's lawsuits that have been driven. Some have been successful around, if you're regulating my years of eligibility, you're constraining my opportunity to earn dollars, $1 million a year for young Milstead. And so that litigious environment, eligibility is one example. You certainly get into all these other aspects from a commercialization standpoint, is why college athletics is spending a lot of time with lobbyists and in DC, and there's interest from the Oval Office with executive orders from call it a government standpoint, right? And I've been up there plenty with our state constituents and spent time in DC. I've roamed the halls of Congress, like it's part of the job now. We work through campus and there's partnerships on that. And I've heard plenty. Are y'all sure, from our representatives, y'all sure you want government more involved? We're not helpful necessarily, and there's some truth to that, which is where you're getting at. But from a litigious standpoint, there's a lot to be said for, hey, there might be some need to have some governmental act in law that helps codify and reduce or manage some of the Wild Wild West or lack of regulations that exist now.
It does seem.
And I did
go
want to
ahead.
add too, I agree with you on the loyalty aspect. I think we all want that. And I feel like that's more important at Clemson maybe than a lot of schools.
Back to your first question, Brad. Yeah.
With that said, the Clemson athlete, in my opinion, is relative to their peers, is still a much more loyal group of kids than maybe in a lot of places.
We're learning this later than everybody else, right? A little bit. Like, I feel like there were a lot of schools that learned it like the first summer, right? Like after a month. And it does feel like we're playing catch up a little bit. I would also, to your point about the litigious nature, the courts have been clear. It's hard to get a 9-0 decision from the Supreme Court. The NCAA gets smacked 9-0 at the Supreme Court weekly. Like, they just get destroyed, and it's because the liberal justices are going, you got to unionize, and the conservative justices are going, you can't restrain trade. And so literally every court case, I joke about this on my show all the time, literally every court case that gets laughed out of court, it's basically just the judge being like, have you bargained? And they go, well, not yet. And they go, well, then we're done here. Bang, bang the gavel, and we go home, and it's back to the Wild Wild West. I think until there's some sort of bargaining, and I know there's a lot of like hammering about employee status and things like that, but call it whatever. You mentioned student athlete. To me, just make something up. Call it whatever and say you can bargain, and then we just bargain with them, whatever it's called, so that the courts will stop laughing at us so that we can get some constraints on the market. That's what I don't know if there's any groundswell to do that. I understand that there's lots of legal reasons why full employee status might not be possible, and it's hard to unionize if there's non-employee status. But is it really hard to just like invent a term and say, let's go bargain?
Yeah, I won't go too far down, but creating a special status or a special class that maybe is short of employee or employment, but can be bargained with. So there is some thought to that from a federal standpoint. I want to jump back, not to be too quaint here, and Brad, I know we want to get to questions from the audience, but the loyalty piece, gosh, and again, I do think that's part of the Clemson and the difference here. But for as much as there is churn, and sometimes student athletes are at a place or at Clemson for a year or 9 months or whatever it may be, but we've seen, I feel like it just becomes more, certainly more accepted, but like there's so many stories that we do see that even if a student athlete is here for a year, and like in Clemson's home, like we saw last year men's basketball, Victor Locken, transfer from Cincinnati. He's originally from Russia, and he was here from June to like May, and walked out on senior day, middle center court at Little John, and he's introduced we love him. Victor, he's kind of a gregarious guy, heck of a player, and he's crying because of at that point, that was March. He had been at Clemson like 8 months, but like that type of impact that it had on him. And so not just to tell the Victor story, and conversely, right, Victor Locken, holy cow, we love that guy at Clemson. We'll talk about him right? And so that's one example, and there's plenty that are the antithesis of that, Brad, to your point, where it's kind of more transactional and throughput. But if you look for it and you want to, and I think at Clemson you want to look and have that connectivity, that loyalty, like you can still find it, even though the game's changing, and there's a lot that is different now than was 5 years ago, than was 50 years ago.
I will say that capitalism is the system of creative destruction. I also have to say that as the executive director of the Snow Institute for the Study of Capitalism, I would be fired if I didn't say that government is never the answer. I have just one last comment, and then I think we're ready to take people to come up to the microphones to ask questions. So why don't you go ahead and start doing that? So while you're doing that, I will ask this question. Would there ever be a possibility of actually moving college athletics, in effect, offshore? That is to say, off campus, and I don't mean that literally off campus, but such that we don't have student athletes anymore. We have athletes and there is a separate corporation running the athletic program, or certainly programs like football and basketball, where the athletes don't have to, they're full-time, they're effectively professional athletes. So why are we pretending that they're students? Why do we treat them like they're students? They don't want to. If some of them don't want to be students, why should they be students?
Yeah, that's hard. Effectively, your university brand is licensed to this entity that has professional athletes. My perspective there is that then it is just professional sports, and the actual notion of keeping student athlete, the connectivity, the literal connectivity to your university is what makes it different. Otherwise, might as well just be the minor leagues with a lesser product because we're not as skilled or professionalized in what we do. So. Your notion there is not the first that has been discussed, but that's a Rubicon in my head.
Right. All right. Let's start over here with Dylan.
Hey y'all, my name's Dylan Oden. I'm from Dillon, South Carolina. I'm a senior here as well. So I have a question about the current state of, I guess this more specifically relates to our conference system. It seems that with more money and big college athletics, there's more room for inequality of programs. And that seems to be just a general trend with more money involved in anything. And so my question here is with the major conferences, slowly getting more and more teams, seems like we're heading towards maybe some people have talked about like a duopoly here. My question regarding this topic is it seems though that these conferences are trying to advance almost like a systemic, institutionalized self-advancement approach to college athletics and college programs within their conferences. So is this truly capitalism? And my other question is, how do we make sure that Clemson can navigate that system and that situation in a way where we end up on the better end of everything?
I'll maybe take the second part. Certainly, the duopolies I think is a really appropriate word more than ever, or increasingly. Certainly we were in litigation, back to litigious environment, litigation with our conference, the ACC. We're a proud member of the ACC. We're in litigation with for 51 weeks was really hard, really strategic, but ultimately to give us not only increased financials based on our media value and brand value and viewership, but also flexibility to navigate as the landscape will continue to change. But it comes down to continuing to invest and perform and be well run. And so I'm incredibly confident that Clemson will remain in the most advantageous national position of which we have expectations from that duopoly sense. You're right on the maybe the stretch of conference and performance. I guess there's some zero-sum game. While you were asking the first part of the question, my mind kept going to the monetization of conferences, Big Ten or otherwise. So much of that driven by media, it encourages their strategy around an expanse here. It's why the Big Ten has members in all 4 time zones, Rutgers in New Jersey and Southern California, so they can maximize kick times and TV times and media markets, et cetera. And that comes at the sacrifice of competition, that now we're flying a volleyball team from Oregon to play Rutgers on a Tuesday night. It's just like really, really hard. But the business aspect, that makes a bunch of sense. The competitive aspect here and the performance levels, it gets really, really strained. So I know that's not exactly answering the first part of your question, but it's certainly very present in how we go about constructing conferences and universities and where their priorities of performance are.
Carter.
Lean down, Carter, yeah.
Hey, I'm Carter. I'm a senior economics student at Clemson. So in the past month, the NCAA has decided to allow former G League professionals to play college basketball, which is a first, really allowing any former professional athletes to play their sport again and regain college eligibility. How does the NCAA or just college institutions in general protect the eligibility rules, which are constantly getting struck down in court, without completely destroying the system we have now?
Well said, really timely, Carter. There's a little bit of government there, which your point, Brad, still holds true. I would say, though, too, there is actually some history prior to this, to the basketball and G League type professional or paid athletes coming back. Tennis has been, there's a lot of individual and summer tournaments and earning prize money and things like that. So there's a little, I say precedent, I don't mean it that way, but there is some at least some prior dancing around professional earning dollars and then still competing collegiately. It's a great question. I would tell you, even over the past week or so, as these recruited G League or former professional basketball players are now gaining eligibility and able to matriculate to college, it's a whole new ball game. So I don't have a great answer to your question, but my point is I think it's a really appropriate of how does that get managed or curtailed, because there's some toothpaste out of the tube now, and where that stops, otherwise other than government's really hard to project. But it's caused a stir as far as like, hey, how do we manage this? How do we keep toothpaste in the tube, so to speak?
Brad Brownell was asked about that today, actually. Clemson's been linked to one of those guys, and he basically was like, we're looking into it. So I would say, like, my answer would be bad for the game, but you better do it, because if everybody's doing
Rules
it, you
of
got
the
to
game,
compete.
yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, and a quick follow-up to that, do you find yourself struggling between doing something that is legal within the rules, but yet there's this feel that this might not be the best for the overall sport?
Yeah, principally, yeah, totally. And there's a balance of that even within stuff that we do within our conference, or the ACC, or football scheduling, or hey, we all put my Clemson hat on, and this is what's important for Clemson, and this would be advantageous for Clemson, competitively or otherwise. But for the good of the league or the good of the industry, I don't know, or converse, like we might be the minority of something that would be advantageous for us to do or not do, but the will of the industry. So yeah, that kind of the philosophical lens is certainly really present on a lot of different levels. Please.
Hey, my name's Anne. I'm a sophomore, and my question is more so on the media side of things. So how have y'all seen just the virality of media affect collegiate sports? And I guess what would be some advice for a student who would be trying to go into that industry and navigating that?
That's a great question. I would say the most pure form of NIL that I have seen is related to the social media following of athletes, where brands are looking at Eric Bakich has been very upfront about this with baseball, where he has said, follow our players, like their posts, share their posts so that they get these opportunities. I would say I'm not great with social media. I dabble, not well. And I would say if I were coming up now, it would be hard for me because everybody's got podcasts. You can record yourself doing whatever. So the virality to that answer, I would say everybody's got a platform. Everybody's got a microphone. Everybody can go viral. I think if you're going viral for the right things, that's good. What advice I would give a young person trying to get in it is find something that you do better than everybody else and try to figure out how to maximize that. That would be my best advice. You got any thoughts on that, Ben?
Yeah, it's funny. Every resume that I get the resumes that I don't read normally start with, I love sports. And I can name every player on the '88 Boston Celtics. There's a lot of people can do that. That's not what makes you great at sports a lot of times, or in media. And in today's market, what Qualk said, where everybody can do a podcast and things like that, then you probably should be doing that. And the people that we have hired that's what their resume is. I may not be great at this, but as a senior in high school or a freshman in college, this is what I tried. And sometimes I failed, but I tried. And I'm getting better at it. And I'm looking for ways to get better at it. That, in my opinion, has been as great an asset on getting to the next step as anything.
Connor.
Hi, my name is Connor. I'm a senior here. And my question is the NIL and transfer portal really the free market answer? Because sports leagues are a fairly unique market. They have tremendous economies of scale because most consumers only want one national champion. Most consumers care more about relative competitiveness than the absolute skill level. You don't want to watch all blowouts. And so, as such, it might be that it's actually efficient to have some sort of cartel-like institution in college sports. And as we know, it was the government that actually introduced NIL and the transfer portal through the antitrust case. All that is to say, would a real free market actually have the NIL and transfer portal? And moreover, in defense of all the boomers, I mean, isn't the government kind of telling them you can't have like loyalty or whatever and those preconditions for that by stepping in and introducing NIL and the transfer portal? Thank you.
My answer to that is I do think what you're saying is accurate. I think the main issue is the incentive structure that says, like Graham said earlier, the incentive structure says I should go in the portal every year because that's the best way to maximize. Again, because the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing in this case. I can give a number to somebody else and say match it, and they have to match it or not. So that would be my answer, is that it actually, yes, it is cartel-like behavior in that respect.
I was going to double down on that. Just to maximize your value over 4 or 5 year, whatever eligibility is would suggest you go in every year. Now you got to bet on yourself and you got to perform and not get injured and things like that. But there's a lot to be said for the point there for sure.
Right, and I think the point is, right, that in a free market system, your Adam Smith would say, the natural system of liberty will work this thing out. So right now we are at the very beginning of a system that is confusing and discombobulating for everybody involved in it, but it will work itself out. The natural course of liberty is for relations everything will find its natural place with time, is I think one way to look at it. Please, Mr. Vosberg.
I'm Luke, I'm a freshman here, and my question is about recruiting. So up until the transfer portal era, recruiting was essentially the only way to get the players onto your team. So with the transfer portal and NIL, sort of why would you even recruit if you can just see a player who's already performed well at the college level and pay them rather than trying to risk developing a recruit who could, if he does perform well, just leave, or having a recruit not work out?
It's a great question, Luke. I think we're seeing the involvement of that, in every sport, and there's less and less signees out of high school, at least to schools at our level, because it's more developed, and that's why you'd even argue that high schoolers that are recruited and commit maybe in their junior or senior versus their freshman and sophomore year, you have a better sense of what type of player they would be or develop into. They're just closer to being an active participant, so to speak. I think the answer why you wouldn't, why there is a balance inherently, not only you get into call it loyalty, Brad, culture, like development, but also now you want to get into market, where Connor was, of it's more expensive to get players through the portal than it would be to probably have them as freshmen and develop and cultivate them that way. So there's the economic aspect of it too, real honestly, balanced with the just the blend of a roster and the consistency of a program versus just a turnover of a roster each and every year to one end of the extreme.
I would say, too, I actually tweeted about this today, I posted on X about this today, at Qualk Talk if you're interested. I would say if given the choice, I'd rather overpay for an adult than a teenager. So that kind of goes to your point. Like if we don't know what the market is and I'm faced with like an overpay or what I think is overpay, we actually got in a discussion about this. What does overpay even mean? I don't know. I'm like ripping my hair out about that. But I would rather overpay for a 20-year-old that has been developed as opposed to overpaying for a 17-year-old that I'm going to develop and then someone else gets to sort of reap the rewards of my development.
And I do think that's going to be one of the unintended consequences of this in some cases. Like St. John's basketball, for instance, so they're not really recruiting high school anymore for the very reason that you said. So that is a concern for maybe a high school athletes 3-4 years down the road. Do they have to start at a lower level which is going to force you to transfer, instead of the opportunity to be a 4-year student somewhere.
All right, I'm sorry we have come to the end of our time. We will take one more question, but I know that at least two of our guests today are going to have to stay around for 10 or 15 minutes while I go get the car. So I'm sure they'll be happy to take more questions. Please.
Hi, I'm Andy Christmas. I'm from Orlando, Florida. First of all, thank you guys for your time tonight. It was an amazing talk. You guys touched on loyalty and how Clemson is, I would think we could all agree, a pretty loyal program. In fact, 21 of Clemson's 33 football coaches are former Tigers with 0 outside FBS experience. How do you think Clemson stays loyal in a disloyal environment? And can they, or is that going to be the cause of the downfall of our athletics?
I'll jump in there, Andy. Heck of a closer. Listen, there's a balance, no question, and it's certainly, I would say this though, there's often recruit interviewed articles, whatever, where they cite that. So it appeals, it has appeal, meaning just the continuity of our staff to certain, recruits, like not all certainly, but like it has benefit. Now again, the notion of mixing in outside perspectives and experience and the diversity of that skill set is important. And so there's, again, I probably view a balance there, and we likely operate on one end of the extreme. And what is the evolution of college football? Your reference continued to suggest that there's probably a better balance there.
I think you have to account for disloyalty now in a way that you didn't used to, because if you're committed, you sign, it's basically forced loyalty, or there's a penalty of sitting out a year and so forth. So I do think wisdom says you account for disloyalty in your calculation, and I think that is an evolution in athletics that coaches have to figure out on the recruiting trail.
Well, all good things must come to an end, and so let me just close by saying thank you to our three panelists. This was just a wonderful conversation today. I think we could have gone on probably for another couple of hours, and I'm sure some of you would have wanted to stay for another few hours, but maybe we'll do this again. So to our speakers, thank you, and my deep thanks to all of you in the audience for coming out. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad.